Hello, everybody, and welcome to African Apocalypse, the virtual screening tour, presented to you by Broadway tonight, in association with the New Black Collective. This is a filmmaker Q&A and a discussion. We have an illustrious panel of guests from the world of academia, politics, and activism to join us in this discussion. Joining us tonight, we have Zara Amanda Myers, Femi Nylander, the writer and narrator, Jeremy Prince, the co-founder of Nubian Link, Cuadra Hacienda from Nubian Link, and Twilight Bay, a community-led social intervention specialist and co-founder of the London-based The Social Solutions Institute for Research and Development. So my name's Sophie Ramcharan. I'm from Broadway Cinema. And I'd like to allow everybody to introduce themselves and tell you, the audience, who they are and where they're from. So let's start with Femi.
Hi, I'm Femi. I've just been on the screen, so you probably already know that that I'm from Bolton. I went to Oxford and made the film. Along with a guy called Rob, who isn't here tonight, and I'm looking forward to talking about the process.
Thank you, Femi. And next we'll go to Jeremy Prince.
Hello, good evening all, wherever you're listening and viewing from. My name's Jeremy. I'm based in Nottingham in the UK, and I co-founded an organisation called Nubian Link that promotes educational achievement and also cultural development. So it was really exciting to be invited to be part of this panel today. And I've seen the film, and I've got some, some comments and some questions, etc. So yeah, it's been fantastic being invited tonight.
Thank you, Jeremy. Next we have Zara Amanda Myers.
Hi everyone, my name's Zara Amanda and I am a filmmaker here in Birmingham. I've seen the film, I think it's amazing. And yeah, I'm looking forward to some discussion.
Thank you, Zara. Next we have Twilight Bay.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Twilight Bay. I'm one of the co-founders of the Reasoning Think Tank. And at the Reasoning Think Tank, we're all about empowering African love, family, community, and freedom and justice. And I'm here today, to share my views on the film being a displaced descendant of the House of People.
Thank you so much. Next is Cuadra Hacienda.
Yes, Hotep, greetings. Yeah, my name's Cuadra Hacienda. Along with Jeremy, co-founder of Nubian Link over 25 years ago now. And I'm just honored and humbled to be part of this tonight, and hopefully I can learn as well as contribute to the discussion tonight. So thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much. So as I said, this presentation, this tour has been organised by the New Black Film Collective. The film has been made with the support of the BFI Doc Society Fund and BBC Arena, and the film premiered at the London Film Festival and is currently released on the BFI Player and is due to be broadcast on BBC Two in 2021. So we are delighted to be able to discuss this tonight. And I thought I'd throw back to the panel to get some reactions to the film. It's beautifully done. Credit to Femi and Rob for the craft in making the film. I'm a filmmaker myself, and to get those heartfelt testimonies and that in-depth knowledge is incredible. But let's throw over to the panel and start with you, Cuadra, because you're on my screen. Any thoughts and reactions to the film that you saw?
Yeah, it was harrowing in parts. It was beautiful in parts. It's humbling in parts. I love the way Femi was almost challenging the spirit of Voulet. Asking him direct questions. I thought that was very powerful. His own his own experience. I picked up as an African abroad, as Garvey would describe us. Two types of Africans: those from home and those abroad. And his experience as an African abroad, born in the UK, going back to Africa, and some of the sort of issues, and and nearly came back with a wife as well. So I thought that was very, very interesting. But yeah, I like the whole style, the concept of the film, and but in particular, I like the way he was challenging Voulet through questions, along the film. I thought that was, for me, very powerful. Yeah, that's been my opening start for 10. But I loved it. I really enjoyed it. Not quite what I was expecting, but quite harrowing in parts, but enlightening, engaging. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Zara, you're a filmmaker yourself. What were your thoughts and reflections on the film?
First of all, I think it's a brilliant film in terms of how it was shot and how it was made. I'm quite privileged in knowing a little bit about the film before I've seen it. So I just think it's awesome. Well done, Femi. It's very harrowing and humbling and real. And it does challenge that conception of colonialism and how it's been portrayed in this country, because we think of it as being, Britain, colonialism, empire, this magnificent empire and stuff. So yeah, it confronts a lot, and it's very confronting, and it's poignant, and this is what we do need in society. As I've always said, this needs to be on the curriculum. This is what people need to know. This is what we need to be showing, because actually it was the dehumanizing of black and brown people throughout the world. So it's very poignant, and well done again.
Well done indeed. Let's go to Twilight.
I thought that the film was. I thought that the film gave me an opportunity to see the history of the French contribution to the dehumanization of African people. I'd heard about King Leopold. I'd seen all of the things about King Leopold, and being born in the United States, I had heard about the English and the Dutch involvement there, and the Spanish involvement throughout the Caribbean and the Americas, and I felt that the film gives us an opportunity to also see that we can't confront what we can't see, and to be able to see it allows us to be able to remember. And I find it interesting that the use of the word "never erase the mission." And the thing about never erasing what actually took place, the opposite of forgetting is to remember. And in many African languages, there's no word for there's no such word as history. There's only words for memory. And when you got something that you remember, it's a part of you. You see it every day. You can't let go of it. And I like being able to see that the descendants of my ancestors, House of people, are refusing to forget. And I think that's important even for those of us who've been displaced into the diaspora as a result of the transatlantic slave trade.
Thank you. Jeremy, and your thoughts on the film?
Yeah, I thought it was beautifully put together, very well presented. The film, the videography of it was very impressive. And for me, it was a fantastic education, because I really hadn't heard of this Paul Voulet before. So I felt like I was going on an educational journey. And so I discovered a lot. And it's often for us to focus and concentrate on, the British Empire and colonialism and all what they did, when this really highlighted all the other kind of empire building that was going on. And, certainly the French dimension was something I haven't really spent a lot of time studying. So for me, it was educational, and I thought that was so valuable. And, Femi, 10 out of 10 for you. And I know the promo of the film is described as an epic journey of discovery. And one of the things I'd like to tease out later is your discovery or your journey, if you like, in terms of putting the film together and getting the buy-in from the communities. And I know there was a few encounters you had with the elders and some of the other community members when you was out there. So yeah, fantastic. And just really glad to meet you nearly in the flesh, on Zoom.
Absolutely, thank you so much. So in terms of the narrative, the Heart of Darkness, book by Joseph Conrad, has been cited as a reference point, but criticised for denying its African characters speaking roles. While this film, African Apocalypse, places African voices at the centre. In discussions about colonialism and racism, do you think the voices of the colonialised victims of racism are centred? And how can we make sure, if not, how can we make sure they're centred? I'd like to throw that to Zara as the filmmaker. You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, I'm going to mute every time because you might hear my cat in the background. I think that it's who controls the lens, really. So in the Heart of Darkness, obviously we have a white Western privileged man controlling the narrative, controlling what's being said, controlling almost what's being seen as well, and how that, and I think it's harrowing, but it kind of still manages to dehumanize one set of people and humanize another set of people. But when we watch the African Apocalypse, we actually see a more truer account of what's actually happened, in the sense that we were dehumanized. Our ancestors were dehumanized. The one poignant part of that film that really stood out for me is it's quite early on, and it's the foot and hand of the 7-year-old, and the man's looking at it, and there's a photo of that. And what we need to understand is a lot of white explorers and anthropologists would take photos, and that's how we have all this historical context of black bodies on trees and black bodies being, beaten and stuff like that, because they wanted to capture that stuff. So I think the contrast between the two is, and I use this word quite loosely, we have, and I'm talking about in terms of history being told from the victor's perspective. You will always get a different perspective. So with the Heart of Darkness, it's told from the victor's perspective. It's told through the lens of whiteness, whereas African Apocalypse is told from those that were subjected to that dehumanization, and it's told through the eyes of blackness.
Twilight, would you like to join in there? Any thoughts on that? Thank you, Zara.
I think Zara said most of what needed to be said there. But I think when it's told from the perspective of the victim or the person who's experienced the trauma, it also allows you to see that there is a greater humanity there, and I think that for our people who've been through such atrocities, to demonstrate a high level of consciousness and a high level of morality says a lot, which oftentimes is missed. And I also feel that when it's told from the perspective of whiteness, it's almost like as if it's being told from the perspective of whiteness to afford an opportunity to be forgiven for some whites, when in reality, that shouldn't be what the motive of the story is. It should be about what people have actually experienced. So it's always better to center our voices at the center of our own stories, so that it's us telling what took place, not those who are the aggressors.
Jeremy, Cuadra, any thoughts on that, the centering of the narrative?
Yeah, one of the things we teach within our organisation, Nubia Link, we do a summer school called Culture College, and it's always about, excuse the cat in the background, we've got cat problems as well, Sarah. But it's about, his story. So we break that word. I'm sure you've heard that term before, where we talk about history and his story. And it's really important that we acknowledge that a lot of what we see as history is only through the lens and the prism of a certain group of people, and normally those who are, in control, so to speak. So it's so important that we as a community, if you like, take control of our own media and take ownership of that. And I think one of the things Femi was addressing in the film was that getting to the actual truth and understanding, and try and sort of dig a bit deeper than just seeing what was documented in the history books.
Kwabna, would you like to come in at that
Well, yeah, I mean, to echo everything that's been said, but as the African proverb goes, until lions have their historians, the tales of hunting will always glorify the hunter. So Femi is one of is a lion. He's telling the lion's story from the lion's perspective in Africa, and we need more lions, and more historians of the lions as well. So to give that proper redress, that proper perspective to his story, we've got to tell our story through our lens of blackness, of Africanness, to counterbalance, the miseducation, because a lot of what we hear of the colonial escapades, if you like, are from a European, a white perspective, and we need different perspectives, especially those that represent us, either on the continent itself, or those in the diaspora who are going back and telling faithfully what's happened. Because I found it fascinating that I think they said, Amina was saying that it's the first time that these, somebody had come and actually wanted to hear their story from their mouths, and get, and that detail. I actually found that quite hard to believe, that this is the first time that their voices were being heard of, and how they felt of the historical atrocities.
Last time I got told I was like a lion, it was by an auntie who was telling me I need to cut my hair. And I think I prefer this comparison.
Femi, just on that point of talking to people and going into their space and hearing those stories, what struck me was the level of post-traumatic stress through the generations that was quite visible and quite apparent. And I just wondered, how did that affect you? How did that affect you in terms of that emotion, that post-traumatic stress? How have you had to cope with that? How have you dealt with that? Because that's quite a lot to deal with, and a huge responsibility to gather these stories. And then what happens next?
I mean, even on the trip itself, there's the scene with Amina and Hassan where I get told that I'm not kind of showing enough emotion, and part of that is because I feel as though I need to approach it with a certain stoicism and with a certain kind of allow the people to kind of tell their story. If someone is telling me that their great granddad had his throat slit by the French and then and he's barely crying because he's told this story so many times, what right do I, as kind of the guy from the Britain who's coming to hear his story, to start kind of bubbling up and this, that, and the rest. So although it's very difficult to hear stories such as the stories that you hear in the film, I think one, there's a degree to which you kind of have to detach yourself as a narrator, and cool, I can tell you how I'm feeling through the voiceover. I can tell you how I'm feeling through the rest without having to kind of steal the ability to tell this story from the people who should be telling it. Because again, as we said in Heart of Darkness, this Marlowe character, everything is shown through his eyes, and it kind of centers the European who's there in Africa and doesn't give any words. It barely gives any words even to Africans in the book itself. Whereas in our film, we wanted it to be about the testimony of these people. And so for me, I had to go into it with a degree of stoicism. But for me as well, I think even before hearing these stories straight up, I'd read a bit about them, and being in the age of kind of social media, you're always seeing these images about what's going on in the States, about George Floyd, about this, that, the rest. So there is a degree to which we become desensitized to it. I think the shock and anger that I feel at the time is very real, but I don't know if I, as a narrator, I as someone who was being told these stories, necessarily had a huge more amounts of trauma personally than someone who is, I mean, other than the fact that I was hearing a lot more than what you hear in the film, because obviously not everything makes the final cut, right? I still think that the experience you have as a viewer hearing this is the same experience I have hearing it, except a bit more proximity because I'm actually kind of in the conversation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Any reactions to what Femi's just said?
I think that what he mentioned about desensitization, I think growing up in the West, and especially when you start to attend sort of academic institutions, sorry, that's my when you start attending academic institutions, I've always found that information is always delivered very detached. You know, there is very rarely a show of emotion. But I also think when you are presenting other people's stories, I think it's key not to sort of embellish yourself in it, because it is somebody else's story, it's somebody else's testimony, and it's important to give them space to share it as they want to. Whereas when we see certain things that are maybe done by our European counterparts, like take for instance, what's that thing that they do every year? Is it Comic Relief?
Really?
And they go out to these little villages, you know, they look for the most disheveled people they can find, and then the presenter, what do? Stop. And it steals the true, you know, it's like, oh my gosh, they felt so compassionate, and suddenly we want to hug them because and this disheveled group are still disheveled, you know. And I think that was a very strong thing to do, Femi, because we are connected ancestrally, it's in our DNA. So to be able to respect that, I think is a very, I don't know if proud is the right word, but I think it's very honorable and it's very respectful.
Yeah, I thought it's very noble, you know, gesture too. I had a question for Femi. When you actually finally got to the grave of Vule, there was 2 graves, wasn't there?
So yeah, there's actually also a guy called Shamwan. So he's kind of the guy, if you remember the tape with the old woman, you remember she says his sidekick was a bit shorter. So if you were to Google the mission, it would be called the Vule Shamwan mission. And there was another guy with Vule who was kind of his sidekick, his lieutenant in command, who was also a bit crazy, who added to the story. But it was his grave, and he was also shot and buried with Vule.
At the same time, simultaneously.
Yeah, exactly. At the same time, so to speak. However, because of the fact that we wanted to make this film somewhat dramatic, as well as a documentary of truth, and because we wanted to kind of give it that wide access, and also because we had to fit a lot of things into 1.5 hours, it would have taken away. I mean, I think it was you that mentioned before, right, that it was nice that I was talking to Paul directly, saying, Paul, I'm asking you these questions, Paul, right? It would have been it was, oh, Paul and Jonathan, right? So we focused on Paul, um, as the kind of antagonist of the story. However, the real antagonist of the story is always the overarching branch of colonialism, right? It's always France and England and Germany and Portugal, which comes in out from that scene when we talk about the Omdurman massacre, when we talk about the Herero people in Namibia and how it's this and the rest. So I think the fact that we didn't go into the fact that it was Vule and Shanwan, but Vule was the principal, is a narrative device which allows it to kind of sit on the dramatic side, whilst we kept and also to make it less about, cool, we've got Vule, but it's actually about the Nigerians, right? And it's actually not just about him, it's about this being a systematic.
Of course, yeah.
But if you want to know more about the
should...
Shanwan guy, look up
Right.
the Vule Shanwan mission, and it will tell you a bit about him as well.
Well, I felt you got that balance just right then in that case. I mean, again, I'm here consuming and absorbing all this information. It's all education for me. So thank you for that, Femi.
I thought when you were asked the question about not showing emotions, I thought it was quite interesting that you were asked that. And me coming from the U.S. and coming from South Central Los Angeles and having lived under a certain type of tyranny there with a particular police chief that we call his name almost in the same way people call Vule's name, Daryl Gates, and lived through the Rodney King insurrection and various other things that have happened there. And I just look at, the deaths in custody that happens in this country, the way in which black people are still murdered by French in France. And I can't disconnect those pieces. All of those pieces are still the same picture of all of it. And when I'm traveling the world, I find myself not necessarily taking anything away from the story. I want to hear what people have to say. I've always been told to listen to their story and hear their story and to learn. And as I learn, and my cup is filled to the point in which it runs over. This is the opportunity then I then share with them what continues to happen, even though I live so far away. What's happening there is not that much different. It's just in a different context, but it's still pretty much the same atrocities, the same dehumanization, the same racism, the same imperialism, and I know that it has these variations where it can look as if it's not that big of a deal. Because I mean, when you look at how many people die from knife crime in the UK in contrast to how many people die from gun violence in the United States, some people would say, well, the U.S. would say, well, you don't know, it ain't that bad over there. But the reality is, to lose one life, one act of imperialism, one act of racism, all of it's bad. And when it's connected in that kind of way, because for me, it was about the connection. Femi, you look like one of my cousins, and my mother's side of my family was traced to Niger, and my father's side of the family is traced to the other side of the border in Nigeria, and my people are House of People. So when I hear that story, I cannot disconnect from it, but I feel the need that it has to be told because I need to understand, being a descendant that was displaced, I still need to be able to identify it and understand what took place. But I also want them to know that for those who were stolen away, there's no disconnect from those atrocities because in a sense, we still suffering them where we are now today.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Cuadra, do you want to come in on that?
Well, again, I suppose just throwing another perspective on what what it brought home for me. I think it was the late great African American scholar John Henrik Clarke talked about history being a past, present, and future event, and I thought that the film brought out the atrocities of the past, the impact on Niger today, what's happening, but also a glimpse of the future. And I thought that was good in terms of the school and the science, using harnessing the sunlight and stuff like that. So you know, again, I just thought it was a brilliant, yes, reflection of the past and the impact of what's going on today, but also, you know, I took something positive from it in terms of where we're going, where, you know, in spite of all that, you know, we're stepping forward on the front foot, you know, whether at home or abroad. And in this case, Niger, you know, you know, look like they've got a, you know, no pun intended on the harnessing of solar energy, but they've got a bright future, you know, as well, or a brighter future because of, you know, in spite of everything.
Thank you. So staying on the subject of Paul Villay and the point about his grave, discussions around, you know, is it desirable for the grave to become a tourist attraction for rich visitors from Europe? That was kind of a theme that was mentioned. I mean, what do we think about the role that statues and monuments play in shaping the way we interpret the legacy of colonialism? And what about Paul Villay's grave? Should we get rid? Should we dig it up?
Well, I don't want to destabilize that question, but what about it? Because the thing that peed me off is where was the marking of the African loss of life? You know, I think one of the elders says when it rains, you know, the bones of you know of dead Africans, of massacred Africans become visible. You know, we know. To be honest, I don't really care for that question. You know, I'd like to see some commemoration, some marking of the African lives that were lost. You know, to see some commemoration, some of that. You know, because the only graves that were marked were I think there was you know of the Europeans that died there, but nothing to mark the loss of life for Africans.
I think.
Yeah, I mean, the people of Niger might have a different perspective on it, but for me, I don't really care for the Villay's grave, to be absolutely honest.
I think the reason that some people in the area guard the grave is representative of the fact that there has been no real progress because of French colonialism. So I remember people saying in the area, the reason we keep this grave is because one day someone might come and make a film about it and it might bring some money here because of the fact that it's so poor. So the only reason that they care to keep the grave of this guy is because they think it might become some kind of historical monument whereby their ongoing poverty, which itself is the result of Vulay's legacy, could start to be addressed. And you can see at the end, a lot of people in the town say, take his grave and send it back to Europe. The World Bank is talking about maintaining his grave. Why should we care about maintaining his grave? Pack up his bones and send them back to France, right? It's an earlier scene, the scene the scene near the end where we speak to the old men and Club at Dankori, right? The drama of Dankori. Club, basically they say the first time a person died here is when Club died here. Club gets his own monument, right? Whereas the rest of the people who died, they don't matter because they're Africans. So even our benevolent character, our kind of Marlowe in the story, as it were, who goes out, supposedly this French guy who goes out to stop Villay and heroically dies trying to stop, right? That's how France wants to paint the story, right? Is, oh, look at this historical wonderful man who tried to stop the evil Villay and was shot. But it's like, no, at the end of the day, Club was trying to take over because Villay had gone too far. It was becoming a scandal, and Club was supposed to take over and then finish off what Villay started, continue colonizing Niger, just in a slightly less obviously brutal way. And you got it on the head there, Kwabena, when you say that the focus needs to be on starting to memorialize, beginning to understand, starting to even record the deaths of the Africans.
Thank you. Any other comments on that?
I'd just like to say I agree. Somebody in the chat said, and I just want to encourage the audience, please do engage with us. Raise your hands, ask your questions. I don't actually believe that we should be guarding the graves of colonizers and things like that. However, on the flip side of that, because we're not dealing with history in a vacuum, we're dealing with world history, we're dealing with the history of all the peoples. I actually think that his grave should remain, not necessarily for to be immortalized or memorialized, but as the legacy of what was done to that land. Because I think sometimes by removing these things, and we kind of had this we might have this conversation, but we kind of had this conversation before, what we're kind of doing is removing a bit of history, and we don't want people to forget about the atrocities of the West to African countries and what those people did. We want to remember not only what they did, but also the resistance of our ancestors towards these people. So sometimes I think removing them completely means that we might lose that element of history, and then they can pretend it never happened, you know. So I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword, really. There's both fors and against, and I can see both. Sorry, I can see.
Yeah, I concur with you, Zara, and I think there is a danger of, you know, history being airbrushed out, and if it's no longer in the frame, that memory of that atrocity that individual did or a group of people, then, you know, that can just easily be erased from the history books. And it's just, yeah, again, it's about that story being told from a truthful perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
The whole truth.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that I agree with both of you that removing of the grave, removing of statues, it is an element of erasing. And you know, the phrase from the documentary itself, never erase the mission at Coney. You know, if you're never going to erase it, it means you have to leave it there. And if you're going to leave it there, there has to be a context of leaving it there. And the context is telling the true history, the true story, and they're giving people the memory and maintaining that memory of what actually took place there. And if we're going to change something, then we change the statutes, not the statues, but the statutes, the laws that remain there, the institutions that the French put in place there that protect their ability to still rape Niger to this day. That's what we need to get rid of and return true sovereignty back to the Nigerians. And that's how we start to rebuild and bring about that brighter future that Kwabena spoke about earlier without it being destabilized again. Taking it to the world stage and having this discussion at a global level of what Europe has done to the planet and hold them to account for it.
I think there is a difference between the grave and the statues. So the grave is where the guy fell, and there's like a little fence around it. There's a thing on it. There's like a little post, and it's where the guy fell, and it's kind of a part of history in that sense. It's not a huge kind of like monumental, like big stone thing, right? The monument to Club is like a memorial of how great Club was. I would be, for example, taking that monument down and putting up a monument which says this is a monument to all the Nigerians who died under Vule, right? In the same way, when you see these Confederate statues in the States and statues over here of people like Rhodes, I'd say that people have learned more about the history of the Confederacy and the history of the Civil War, and the true history of this by the people calling to get these removed, because the people calling to get these removed are bringing attention and saying, this is why we want it removed, because actually the Confederate flag is a monument of evil. This Confederate general who all of these kind of people love. And why do they love him? Why do they want the statue to stay? Because he represents that idea of white supremacy. The same way people are, when we had the Rhodes Most Full thing in Oxford, no one knew who this guy was until we started to say, actually, his statue shouldn't be there because of this, that, the rest. We should have a statue of a strong South African person in order to represent the fact that we've moved beyond, right? And so it's in the same way that there are no statues of Hitler left in Germany, and yet everyone knows who Hitler is because the story has been told, because history is written by the victors and the Germans lost, and so the story of the Holocaust has been told. I think that if all these statues of Confederate people are to come down, all these statues of colonialists to come down, that is because of the fact it can then be written in the history books that we had to remove the statues of these people because the narrative got rewritten to say these people are no longer people to be admired. These people are no longer people who we should say, okay, cool, they gave us loads of money because they wanted to be immortalized in stone, and so we're going to continue to immortalize them. We can immortalize them in history books, in museums, in films, right? Even if the grave went tomorrow, there's still a film out in which the grave is there, right? No one can deny it exists because there's a film, there's a record of it. But yeah, I think there's a slight difference between the grave itself and a statue that someone donates money to an institute because they want a statue of themselves, because that's the base of it, right? A lot of these statues, they come from narcissism. They come from someone saying, I want a statue, or I want a museum to be named after myself. Or even today, I'm a billionaire because I made money in oil, and I want Harvard University to name a building after me, so I'm going to give 10 million pounds to Harvard University. Where did I get that money from? And if I got that money in dodgy ways, why should that building not be renamed to something which is more representative?
We have a question from Yvonne, and I also just want to say hi, John Simmet.
Is he joined us?
He has, yeah. Well, I saw him. He might have gone now, but I definitely saw him. So I just wanted to say hi to Yvonne. Yeah, Yvonne's got a question. And hi, there he is. Hi, John.
Hi, John.
It's not really a question, it's more of an observation. Can you all hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things I really liked about the film was the reference to the other atrocities. And it occurred to me that one of the things we need to do as Africans in the diaspora is to be more aware of the activities of the Europeans in Africa, on the African continent, because it's so parochial the way that we're taught. So first and foremost, there is that European tendency to make themselves a hero in every scenario, which is a bit strange. But it's a fact that what we know is Britain painted the world, the map pink, but we don't know what they did when they got there. And I think it's really important. I mean, they committed atrocities everywhere, but I think as Africans living in the diaspora, we really ought to be much more aware of what the activities were, so that we can speak not just with confidence and forcefully, but really substantiate that moral high ground, because we have it, but we're acting as if we're at the bottom of the base of the hill. But that's not the reality. There's that cognitive dissonance that's going on, that everybody is refusing to name.
Okay. And what do you think that cognitive, I can never say this word, cognitive dissonance. I've got a speech impediment. Somebody help me out.
Well, the point is it's
cognitive dissonance.
That's it. Cognitive dissonance.
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 No,
it's not going to happen. The list.
It was good. It was good. It was good. The point I'm making is that, you know, the story of the war is always written by the victor.
Mm-hmm.
But when the victor won the war, not by going toe to toe in battle, in a battlefield with both sides equally armed, when they climb up the hill and they have guns and mortar shells and they fire on an unsuspecting village, that's not a war. So what we need to be able to do, this is why I think, well done, Femi, brilliant documentary. It was at times very hard to watch. But what it did show me was in detail one road. Now, you know, it's hard for us in the UK to imagine the grand scale physicality of the African continent. But every nation has a story. So, you know, we know about the Wall of China, where they say that every brick cost a life. So that's the reality of what happened. And I think that the more we have, it's brought to light the scale of the atrocities. So we know that when they say, oh, there was one, like they hid the story about what happened, you know, the Mau Mau uprisings, when the Kenyans were fighting for their independence. And that they had concentration camps and they had torture similar to what had happened in Germany, but they denied it. That's that cognitive dissonance, that those that know the truth speak as if they went in there, and that's the story we're told, that they went in and they wanted to do good and they did good. But there's no explanation of how comes Jewish people own the mines in South Africa. It's all these things. We have all these bits of information, but no connecting the dots. And one of the excellent things about this documentary is that you start at the coast, you get to Lake Chad and all the nastiness that went on, and then tying it into that book, The Heart of Darkness, which I find difficult to read because it is all about the Europeans and the Europeans' perspective. And even if he is trying to say, you know, these people are evil, it's just a nasty thing to read and it's difficult to get hold of. So I suppose there's 2 points that I'm making. One is that we need to expand our knowledge. And secondly, we need to be telling the story. And whether we are Africans in the diaspora or Africans in the, or descendants of the displaced and the massacred on the African continent, it's all our story and we need to be telling it. And every single nation within these constructed boundaries has all of these stories. And then once we've done that, we can look and understand more carefully what was in place before it got there. Because I think without that, when we hear the stories of what went before, it's hard for us to pull it together.
Thank you, Yvonne. I think that's some brilliant points you've raised there. And I think what Femi's film is doing is it is bringing that to light. We are telling these stories. We are telling our own stories. We are changing the lens of the narrative. I want to say, I think that when we're looking in terms of what we know and how we know that there's been this re-emergence. Say if we go back to like the civil rights movements and things like that, where people were feeding down information, and then obviously we've had the revolutions here. But I think as Africans in the diaspora, if I say this, it's not to be offensive, we're still quite a young community. We're still quite a young community in terms of human rights, civil rights, challenging anti-Black racism in the West and all those kind of things. So we're constantly putting out fires. We're putting out fires here, we're putting out fires there, we're putting out fires there. We've got some people trying to tell stories. We've got some people trying to start a grassroots organization. But I think what's happening, and we see this with Femi, we see an emergence of young people capturing our stories and being very radical how they tell them. We're seeing the emergence of authors. Professor Kehinde Andrews was on the panel here in Birmingham on Tuesday, I think it was. So we're starting to see, and he's got the first and only BA, MA course in Black Studies. So I think it's happening. It might not be happening as quick as we want it to, but it's definitely coming through.
That's wonderful.
But I'd like to just address Gosha's question that she's put to us. So I guess I'd like to put that to Femi. So thank you, Gosha, for the question. And basically you're asking, did he see or witness any benefits of colonialism when he was visiting? Is there any positives that you can draw in terms of legacies of that episode?
Not really. I mean, like there were railroads, but the railroads were there from the ports to the places where the the natural resources were.
Get
right?
the resources out of the country.
Exactly.
Yeah,
the railroads went from. I mean, most of the capital cities of colonials of at least of the cities that were on the coasts. So the Ivory Coast, the Gold Coast, what was also the Slave Coast at the time, one of them was called. All of the capital cities were on the ports near the sea, and you'd have railroads that went from wherever the natural resources were to the port, and then they would take it over to Europe. I mean, I think, as I say, even if there were some kind of lingering benefits, they would be completely outweighed by the fact that, I mean, it still hasn't finished. In Niger, they use the Central African franc, the West African franc, or the West African Niger, which is a currency which is pegged to the euro and printed in France. So France basically still controls the currency of most of these Central and West African French nations. As you could see, it's the French National Uranium, the French National Energy Company was basically, well, I mean, the French National Nuclear Energy Program was based on uranium Niger, which was being mined by people who didn't have access to safe equipment and weren't told that uranium was radioactive, and who were getting cancer, and who I met in the film and you saw talking about it. Those guys were there now, suffering the effects of neo-colonialism. So colonialism really goes on till today. And institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, through structural adjustment loans, through austerity policies and the rest, continue to impoverish these nations. And I think any kind of benefit that may be kind of given, it was always given in a double-edged sword way, and the harsher edge was the edge of the fact that it wasn't a benefit. Railroads came, but the railroads were there to steal the country's resources. Yes, some people in West Africa now speak, some people in Niger now speak French, which helps them supposedly plug into a global language, but it's only a global language because France went out and colonized other parts of the world. And the only reason that English and French are global languages are because of the fact that England and France were huge colonialists. So a lot of the benefits which are given, I think, are completely outweighed by the theft that colonialism is. And I don't agree at all with kind of the Niall Ferguson types who say, oh yes, well, we did a lot of good as well. I don't think so.
Interesting.
Here.
Whilst I've still got the microphone open, I just wanted to ask you, Femi, also, did you draw any parallels with your time at Oxford in terms of the institution and the structures, and anything that kind of held true, or any similar parallels when you was making this film, when you was out over in the motherland?
Just in what regard? What kind of, between Oxford and just...
Well, just like, obviously we know sort of Oxford as an institution is is sort of at the top of the tree. It's quite an elite. It is an elitist institution, and obviously you've done very well to get there. And we need more representation in those institutions from a point of view of educationalists and also students. But I just wonder if there was any sort of similar vibes or feelings of sort of resistance or subconscious bias or that sort of thing when you was sort of putting together the film. I'm just kind of a bit of a curveball question, I guess, but I just wanted to get your take on it.
I mean, I've not had that question before, so I don't have a packeted answer, but I'm gonna try. I mean, in Oxford, is, I guess, the thing that could be said is that the one theme which is kind of developed throughout the film as well in terms of personal identity is this kind of middle ground, this kind of double consciousness, you might call it, right? Where it's kind of, you're partly there, you're partly here as a member of that diaspora. And Oxford is a very, very, very white environment where in some ways you're kind of out of place as a person of color, and as a Black person specifically. And then again, in Niger, as someone who came to Niger, who is Black, right, but is still, I grew up in the West. I'm quite westernized in lots of ways. I didn't know the language. I'd started to learn the language, and you can see throughout the film, by the time I get to Dankore, I'm speaking to the old men and explaining all of this and the rest.
Well, I remember that bit where you was going to see the elders, and they said, there was a reference saying, make sure you tell them he's English.
Yeah, exactly. Make sure you tell me English and Nigerian, but just say English. Just say English, right? It's that kind of vibe. And so
there's English.
An element to which I'm kind of that in the middle of both, and so there's an element to which you're neither really here nor there, but then you can. It's the whole is you could say code switching, but it's more than code switching, because I don't think you could describe me kind of starting to learn the customs and the language and the culture of Niger as code switching. It's a much more deep experience than that. But in the same way, me learning how to, oh yes, well, wonderful, Jonathan, and get along in Oxford, it definitely is code switching, right? But there's still a parallel between the two. And so I'd say that the only similarity between Oxford and Niger in my books, and Oxford, as you said, is a bastion of privilege and elitism in one of the richest countries in the world, with excessive amounts of everything and balls and this, that, the rest. Whereas Niger is the bottom of the Human Development Index. So I wouldn't say that there's, because of this history of colonialism, one is the epitome of the colonizer and the other is the epitome of the colonized in one sense. The only kind of difference that I drew out on a personal experience level is that feeling that I have to learn how to accustom myself to that environment.
Fabulous. Thanks, Femi. We have time for another question. This will be our last question from the audience, as we are running a little bit out of time. So does any of the audience want to ask any of the panelists any questions, or put any questions to Femi? Come on, don't be shy.
This is to ask Femi. Do you have any plans to go back to Niger to see what changes there are? Maybe to record more of how, I think the thing that I found most painful was the fact that even very young children are really in tune with the suffering that they had. So I think, I don't know if you're wanting to write a book or to follow that up. And secondly, what is your next project?
So that's the question, right? The question is, because there's only so much time in the world, right?
Absolutely.
Is it to focus in and zoom more in on Niger and on this story, or is it to, as you rightly said before, Africa is a huge continent with 2,000 languages. It was all these different nation states now. I mean, the Congo itself is the size of Western Europe, and the continent is littered with stories, both before it was colonized and stories of colonial violence that haven't yet been told. And so, do I center my project? I mean, we are planning on bringing the film itself to Niger when it becomes possible because of COVID, and making sure that people in Niger see it because they have to see it. And we're also planning on pushing the film in France as well, because it's really a film about French colonialism in general, but in terms of a country that could feasibly, for some reason, have a criminal court case brought against it for reparations. As a result of this film, that's not going to happen to the UK, but it might well happen to France. If right, so that we need to push this film within both the French and the Nigerian spaces and globally. I think people, you are very, very right in saying before that this is all interconnected. Twilight, but I mean generally I think my interest more is now, cool, this story is there, the information is there, the record is there. I want to try and go to Sudan and tell the story of the Omdurman massacre, or try and go to Kenya and look into Mau Mau more deeply, or maybe look at the Herero genocide. I want to try and, if possible, and obviously travel is hard to plan anything at the moment, and there's going to be a time scale to which I want to focus on pushing and making sure this film has the impact it can have. But if possible, in some point in the future, I want to continue to go to other places and cover more of these stories in other that other untold stories, basically, if possible.
Thank you. It's a bit small coming from me, but I just find it so commendable, and you were so respectful. And also, it appeared to me that there was a personal learning curve for yourself in the experience of actually making this documentary. Would that be true?
Mm-hmm. For sure. You can see throughout the you can see the character arc It's very, very weird, kind of seeing myself as a character rather than as myself, and having to do that in the filming process and in the rest, right? And having to discuss, okay, well, this is why we're including this very, very awkward scene. This is why this at the rest, because yeah, it's very, you're outside and inside, and it's about making sure that you don't become the center of the story, but that your story helps to enlighten the the reality of what happened, right? And I think that the personal development you see in the film is a very real personal development, um, for sure.
Okay. Well, once
Yeah.
again,
I mean,
thank you
one thing
very
that
much.
struck me, Femi, it's something that you said that just really jumped out at me. So you something along the lines of "There's so much I can't work out here," and I thought, well, don't beat yourself up, brother. You know what I mean? It's you're telling the story. I mean, almost the reckoning may actually come later, or it's you're not necessarily going to go there and get all the answers. It's not all going to be apparent immediately. Some of what will come to you in down the line. But I thought you was a bit hard on yourself when you said that. That there's so much I can't work out here. I can't remember what in context, but just that phrase just jumped
That
out
was
at me, and I
after
just thought,
that was after I was offered a wife.
oh, is it? Okay. All right, okay. All right, so you couldn't work out how much the dowry was. Is that what it? All right, okay.
I think it was in the
I just
context
think
of,
sometimes
was she joking when she offered me as a daughter? Or was
all
she
right,
just making
okay,
fun? Yeah, because obviously there's the aspect where it's a funny scene and it's kind of like, well, what's going on? But then also there's the real thing of, well, I mean, this is Niger and dowries are very real things, and when a wealthy foreigner comes and can help your children kind of escape poverty, then it's a very real thing to be like, okay. And you've got a lot of men from Nigeria even who go to Niger, wealthy men from Nigeria who go to Niger and marry people there, right? So it's all, and there's so many different layers to the country. I mean, Niger has
okay.
11 official languages. It's got we looked a little bit into the spirituality element and the idea of the
Yeah.
overarching structure of Nigerian society being based on Islam. However, Islam itself is a kind of religion which came through the Arab expansion, and there are these indigenous beliefs which predate Islam, which are explored in the film. There's all sorts of stuff going on, and we only went along a very small part of the country, a very, very large country. I think you could make hundreds of films about Niger and have content left over.
Yeah, I thought that was a great thing you did as well, because the animist element of it and nature, the spirits of nature, the natural spirit represented in faith systems that predate embryonic faiths, because I'm growing up in the States. My mother was a Christian. I got uncles and my father's side of the family that were Muslims. But yet this spiritual element that we had, I never quite understood why they had this spiritual element that did not necessarily represent itself in what we understood to be the embryonic faiths. But but then when you look back and you're able to see that this is very much so present on the continent as well. And that was another thing that I enjoyed about the film, is that because it shows that there is an international, national, and local link to all of this that's being told. And I've always been told to link all of those elements together, because we are a global people. And so in that context, I understand all of the various differences, but there are a whole lot more similarities than differences. And I felt that the animist part of it helped me to understand a part of my own story, being a person that was displaced to the United States.
For sure, the religious element is really, really interesting, and there's a lot that you can look into there. But for sure, Islam and Christianity both came to the continent through through two different waves of colonialism, and it's how they interact with the faiths that came before. It's really interesting. Carry on. Someone was going to interject. No?
We didn't really get we didn't really get into the female. There's some aspects about the women, but in terms of our traditional religious spiritual beliefs, they are female centered, by and large. The matrilineal, matrifocal, the spirit of Gonao, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, it was a female energy, and I think that's something, just backing up what you were saying, Twilight. That's what I took. Something. I used to be told to be afraid of spirits of that, but it's something that is very much intrinsically part of us. And no matter what, Abrahamic religion comes, we know that the African golden thread will always be there. So and I thought that was another thing, a big takeaway from me, the female centeredness of our spiritual practice and religion.
Well, we have to wrap up now.
Sorry.
Jeremy, our co-host, he's had to leave. He's given his apologies, but thank you to Jeremy in his absence for his contribution. Does any really final comments from my co-hosts before we go?
I'm just putting my email in the chat, so if anyone wants to drop me an email and keep in contact, feel free to.
Perfect. Okay, well, the film is now available on the BFI player. So I would encourage audience members to share the link, find it, talk about it, and spread the word on this really important piece of work. The virtual tour, which has been organised by the New Black Film Collective, is due to go virtually to London next, Glasgow and Manchester. So all the details are on the New Black Film Collective's website and available on Eventbrite as well. So on behalf of Broadway Cinema, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us tonight. And Femi, once again, congratulations on a really strong piece of work. Virtual round of applause. And we all support you in your journey to continue this narrative. And if ever you needed support, to reach out, or we're sort of filmmakers in our collective, and advocates and strategic people, reach out to us. We'd love to help you on your journey. So please don't be a stranger. We're all co-hosts here, and it's an important narrative to continue. So thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.